Welcome, guys, to this week's episode of Heavy Metal Tones with me, your podcast host, Tony Evans. A little bit of a different tack this week, guys. I'm going to steer away from the heavy metal genre. Not for long, just this episode, so don't get panicky going, I just need to listen to metal. This is going to be, I'm sure that most of you will get something out of this. So, this week's episode is about, as you would have seen in the title, about punk. Punk US and UK, or UK and US, the differences, why it's important, why it no longer exists, I don't think, and why I love it. So firstly, let's get into the history of the genre. So even dyed-in-the-wool Englishmen like me, who is fervently British, will tell you, oh, punk started in the UK. Well, clearly it did not. It, as a movement, musically and sonically, at first anyway, it starts in New York in and around 74, 75, when in 75 the Dictators released Go Go Crazy, 74 in fact, and that has the sort of musical progenitor of the punk sound you hear, or that we are more aware of now, and then of course you've got the New York Dolls, and you've got the MC5. Of course, MC5 are very, very important because they sort of add where the American punk scene was mainly a sped up, drug infused bastardization of rock and roll, which is I absolutely love it. The MC5 added that little bit of sort of naughtiness, in respect that the CIA were always on their case. They were on their blacklist. I mean, when you don't release a song in the 60s with the lyric "kick out the jams, motherfuckers," and especially in America, and not get eyebrows raised, which clearly they did. I used to hang around with a punk band in the UK called Ruptured Dog. Hi Tony, if you're listening. I doubt you are. And he, they had a song called "We All Love the Motor City 5," which is what the MC5 is. And my God, you know what? That's where I got into them, because I was like, oh, who's the MC5? And I put it on, and I could really see where it came from. Excuse me, put my tea down. So it was that. So the New York scene, it was very small. It was confined to like one or two clubs in the US, mainly the CBGBs, or I think that's country bluegrass blues in New York, and all the bands of that particular era were playing there. Television, Blondie, New York Dolls, the Ramones. I will get onto the Ramones in a second. They were all playing this, hyper fast, sped up, Chuck Berry bastardizations, and throwing shapes all over the stage. Usually, unfortunately, and very sadly, because it did infect the British scene as well, it was heroin based. So they were all taking this drug that is, as John Lydon put it, a blot on humanity. And it sort of it created that speed, of which sort of punk is sort of really known for. But it was very you had two schools of that punk in America. You had your Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers. You had your New York Dolls, which were the fast, speedy Dictators, things like that. The Ramones, and then you had your art house like Television and Blondie, okay, and Talking Heads. They were sort of the art scene part of it, which does mirror the UK very aptly, I think, to some extent. Now, the reason I think that that the pardon me that they are so different as seen is the historical backgrounds of which they come from. So if you think the New York, okay, so America in the 70s, it was, they'd come out from a war, they'd had the swinging 60s with hippies, and let's be honest, I'm disrespect to hippies out there, but they didn't do anything. Just sat in fields smoking dope and looking at flowers. All right, they made some good music, and I'm going to put that in brackets, they made some good music, and the problem with that is that the kids that are making that music, or coming up and listening to that music that's coming through, again, this is mirrors the UK very aptly. They were bored of that, hey man, just sit back, zone out, warp out, all that kind of crap, and so they wanted excitement. They wanted the excitement that their fathers, and sadly a lot of them war veterans, Vietnam, Korea, actually Americans were in Korea, sorry, Second World War, anyway, they're, and also this sort of scared of communism and this sort of tight sort of a collegiate system in the colleges, of all the shortcut hair and the varsity jackets and the going to the bop and the hop and all that sort of stuff, very clean, very nice. And I think that the Americans, those scenes, particularly the New York scene, were fighting against that. They lived in a dirty, hard-fought metropolitan city that, and a lot of them had no money, just like the UK scene, and they were just trying to make exciting music that was as exciting as they felt when they took the drugs that they took. And I'm not condoning that by any means. That's how they would have felt for them. And so, but they were not. It is the reason the American punk scene, I think, sort of morphed into hardcore and so that stuff is because they didn't have the history that the English didn't. Also, it didn't take off. It literally was one. You may have some in Detroit. There might be a couple of a band here or there that would travel to New York, see the band, a couple of bands like the Ramones on tour maybe, and try to replicate them. But it wasn't. It didn't take off. It wasn't like wildfire. Was conversely in the UK, sort of in 1975 to 76, England has come out of a war like the rest of the world. It got into a very dour 50s because we still had rationing. Now, for you Americans that don't know what that is, or people around the world, you get a little book, and the government gives you a book, and you can have only a certain amount of food. And it wasn't because we were short of food during that time. It was to keep the nation healthy, and to try and minimize the impact of future shortages of food. And statistically, British people were much healthier wartime than they have been since, because they couldn't consume too much fats and sugars and salts. They were limited. My mother was a classic example. My mother never saw a banana until she was 13. My mother was born in 1932. And so, it's really, really interesting. So they've come out of the war. They've had the austerity of post-war Britain. They've gone into the swinging 60s, where everything, you've never had it so good, as I said, right? Everything was, we were manufacturing, we were the hub of fashion, music. Everyone wanted to be in London, Carnaby Street, Oxford Street, they all wanted to be there. The Marquee Club, the Town and Country Club, the Hammersmith-Odeon. It was all being there, and the trouble was that kind of prosperity is good for the, like my father. I mean, my father used to say to him, I said to him, I said, Dad, do you ever remember the six swinging 60s? And Dad said, no, I had 3 children by the time 63 was around. So no, he didn't. And so that like classes up. So my parents' generation, they enjoyed, and maybe a bit younger, they enjoyed the swinging 60s and the excesses of the swinging 60s. But there lies the word, excesses. So come 74 and 75, England was in all sorts of dire issues. Okay, we had 2 consecutive governments crippling the economy with its fiscal policies. We had the 3-day week. Now I remember this. I was only 4, but I remember the 3-day week. I remember no electricity for 3 days. So you could only work for 3 days because the coal strikes and the electricity and the miners' strikes. Sorry, the miners and the union strikes. And so Dad would only work 3 days, and we'd sit at home in the dark. I remember my brother, who at the time was 17, sorry, rigging up a car battery to put the radio on, so we could listen to the radio and watch occasionally a few broadcasts on TV, reruns, of course. It was cold. The streets, I mean, everyone was on strike. The streets were full of rubbish. Like John Lydon said, a classic example. I mean, a lot of his words are hyperbole, but he says they wore the bin bag in London as the punks did because there was so much. It was what was on the streets. It was mimicking. The streets were full of rubbish because there was the garbage men for you Americans, or the trash men, or the bin men where I come from, all on strikes, piled up everywhere. So we were paying the price of excesses of the 60s and poor governmental management. And so the 16-year-olds coming through in the streets of London, I mean, high unemployment, the highest unemployment for a decade in 76. And so there are young men and young women who were disenfranchised, didn't know what to do. And at that time, sorry, I'm just getting some tea. At that time, music was everything. It was everything. Young people now have no idea what it meant to us, and what it still means to some of us. But what it meant to us, it was everything. You would wait for Top of the Pops to come on the TV, whether it was mimed or not. It didn't matter. You wait for Top of the Pops. You would put on Radio 1 or Radio 2. Actually, I don't think it was Radio 1 then. It was just Capital Radio, possibly. Yeah, I think there was a Radio 1, but you might just burgeoningly young Radio 1. You'd listen to Tony Vance. Well, I did heavy metal, but it was his heavy metal show. But there was others. There was the Robert Peel. Robert Peel was the voice of punk and rock and roll. And so there was these young disenfranchised people thinking, I need to get out. I need to make music. So I'm going to get out of this place by being a rock star, being a pop star. And they look to their heroes. I mean, the Kinks. We talked about Americans, where the Dictators are the root of punk in America, maybe a little bit before then. In the UK, it was the pub scene. It was the late 60s Kinks that had that real London dangerous edge, and then you had Dr. Feelgood, Eddie and the Hot Rods. And honestly, guys, I'd really please go there and have a listen to any Dr. Feelgood, anything by them, anything by Eddie and the Hot Rods. It's dynamic. It is, as I said, it's like the American version. So it's like the kids wanting the rebirth of rock and roll. Again, in the UK, we'd had in the early 70s a glut of progressive rock. Now, I love progressive rock, so I'm not going to have a go at it. But the kids back then didn't. They couldn't visualize themselves in the same way that you would say, if you lie down and put on a rock and roll song, you could pretend for 3 minutes you're that that person. It was much harder for working class people and kids to listen to, say, ELP, Van de Graaff Generator, Genesis, Yes. I mean, I can name them a lot, the ones, all of them I love. It was difficult for them to sublimate themselves into that scene. So, they wanted to break down the class barrier. They wanted to get over the Macmillans and of this world. That's the Prime Minister at the time. They wanted to take back what I think they felt was theirs. It wasn't art house, although there is art house elements to UK punk, but it wasn't art house. It was something that was streets. It was like the Cray twins. Again, look into those. They were East End villains. My father worked for them. He wasn't a villain. He just worked in their pub that they owned, the Blind Beggar in the East End. That's another story, and it's something that if you ever see Legend, the movie Legend, that's the modern version of it. Interesting, really interesting story. But yeah, that's another side story. And my dad was a hard man. So it was about bringing the street sound back, and interestingly, not to the mainstream, because I don't think differently to the American scene, British punks were not keen on sharing their little world. Them being at the Vortex or the 100 Club, in the UK, any of those sort of early gig venues that were there. They didn't want it. They want to share it. It was theirs. It was their scene, and they discovered it and they'd made it. Bands. That everyone says that they were there on the Screen on the Green when Pistols played, which was just up the road from where I live. The Screen on the Green, actually. I don't know anyone that went there. I mean, I do know that Tony from Ruptured Dog went and saw the Pistols in a prison on the Isle of Wight, so that was an amazing experience. He wasn't in prison; you could just go and see them there. It's a weird world we live in. But bands like in the UK, I mean, the thing is, American bands is you can name a few, but you can't name many. But apart from say the Ramones. But if you ask someone to name British punk bands, then I know because it rolls off my tongue, but people can name them hand over fist. Now, I'm going to refresh my tea. I'm going to let you listen to some adverts, and you can choose whether to buy into the product or not, or fast forward for them, whatever you want to do. And on the other side, I'm going to come back and talk about UK punk, because that's the thing that I'm most connected with, and the sound that they made. Anyway, talk to you on the other side, guys. Bye. Welcome back, guys, to Heavy Metal Tones. This is the second part of my punk episode. My tea is warmed up. I've actually got my Sex Pistols mug in my hand. And here we go. So, UK punk scene. Of course, I'm going to be more UK centric. So please be, forgiving those Americans out there listening. Hi, guys. If you just don't like the UK scene, but into the American scene, I know a fair bit about the American scene, but I'm going to talk about this one because it's what's more important to me. So the thing that people think about when they think about punk, if you would close your eyes and think about punk, you think of that London postcard scene, Mohicans, leather jackets, studs, piercings, violence, and pogoing. Now, that is completely and utterly not the case. Yes, the mid-80s, late 70s to early 80s punk scene was that. But the glory of and I was one of those, but the glory of the early punk scene was anything went. There was no uniform. They wore ripped shirts. They, I mean, as John Lydon said, he had safety pins in his pants because he had no bloody money. They had to use them to keep their pants together. Now, the Americans, so the lead singer of Television, he would have safety ripped shirts and safety pins. Again, I think his was art-based, whereas with John, it might be a bit of a copy, but he says in his biography that it's because he had no money, and I'm going to like to believe that, okay? Naivety, or maybe not, I'd like to believe it. So there was no uniform, anything went, okay? You saw people with brightly coloured hair. There was androgyny, because it was, coming out from that sort of David Bowie era. T-Rex, who was another, so I mentioned earlier, was another influence into the punk scene. It's sort of, it was an interesting time because, none of the kids that really made the scene, and they were kids, were Art House originally. So, the 100 Club, when they played the first Pistol gig, well, not the first Pistol gig was actually on November the 6th, 1975. But the 100 Club, where, the Banshees played, and the Banshees played an awful set. None of them can play. It was, and Sid Vicious, was on drums. The Pistols played, there was them, there was, I think the Vibrators, and I'm also going to think it was, give me a second, my brain has gone blur, I just need to check that. Welcome back, guys. So I had to just double check myself. Yeah, so it was Subway Sect, I couldn't get it in my head. The Damned, the Nipple Erectors, and just a whole slew. Susie and the Banshees, I mentioned, the Buzzcocks, the Clash. It was a great, I would imagine, an amazing night. Now, the reason that was such an important gig was just before then, the Pistols had played it on a show in Manchester on TV, and overnight, hundreds and hundreds of bands formed. The Buzzcocks formed. Joe Strummer left London SS and made the Clash. They all travelled down to the seat of rock and roll, of what they thought was year zero in London, and all these bands just blew out of nowhere. I mean, my brother was in a punk band. I tried to be in one. Obviously, I'm not that first wave, although my brother did spend a lot of time in and around Malcolm McLaren and Vivian Westwood's shop in London, in Chelsea, called Sex. They'd had a shop there previously, called Let It Be Rock, and so it was about Teddy Boys, and then they sort of Vivian really was the counterpoint for the image that was soon to come for Pistol. So t-shirts, as I mentioned before in a previous episode, where I had a t-shirt that had the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs being gangbanged by Snow White being gangbanged by the Seven Dwarfs. You had the Cambridge Rapist. Sorry, that's a horrible thing, but it is the had the Cambridge Rapist mask on there. They had, they used Nazi symbols. Again, they weren't Nazis. Okay, they're offshoots that later on where there is skinhead movements. That's a different thing, but I'm not talking about that. They were just doing it for shock. Idiots, yes. It's something I don't condone, and I would never wear one, but they did, okay? Then you had, of course, all the artwork by Julian, who did all of the Pistols imagery, like God Save the Queen. No, sorry, Jamie Reed. Julian Temple was the one that filmed a lot of the gigs and made the movies. Jamie Reed. Iconic. The Queen with a pin through the nose. The simple anarchic yellow and pink cover never mind the bollocks. A classic thing about that is so typically British. They got a lawsuit for using the word bollocks as it was a rude word. Bollocks is actually an old English word that means nonsense, and they went to court and proved it. And as John Lydon once said very aptly, the English language is how you interpret it. Don't tell me how I'm using the word. I'll tell you how I'm using the word, and that's it's so John. One second, guys. My battery's about to die in the laptop. I'm just going to go and pop off and get the cable. Wait for this seamless link. What an amazing seamless link that was. I just realised I was talking for about 15 minutes there and I wasn't recording. Some days I shouldn't get out of bed. Anyway, so as I was saying before, it was an amazing eclectic mix of images, of musical styles, of technique. Not once, nothing in the early fiery furnace of early punk where the music was raw. I mean, very raw. I love lo-fi music. So I absolutely love early Motorhead, who is, let's face it, a kind of punk band. Don't get me wrong, you know me. I love the delicious, clean textures and depths of really well-made progressive music and modern music. But something deep in my soul is viscerally connected to the 3-chord, dirty, 4-track, bedroom-recorded guitar tumble. And the great thing about the punk scene was the diversity of the bands. You had bands like The Damned who released the first punk single, but there's contentious there because I'm Stranded by the Saints in Australia came out a little bit before, and they sort of and are a punk band. How they got the same sound as the UK, we're not sure, because it wasn't really but it was shared. It wasn't pre-internet. Sad story about that is that they came to the UK to tour, and the UK punks, being the UK punks who hated outsiders, they were very insular, did not like people coming into their scene, which is, I think, sort of probably what killed it off towards the end. Was that they really didn't like the Aussies going in there, and they sort of cold-shouldered them, which is really sad, in my opinion. Anyway, so you have these diversity of these bands, like The Damned, okay, with an ex-gravedigger and Dave Vanian on vocals, and Captain Sensible with his beret and his sunglasses, and Rat Scabies on the drums. You got the one of my favourite bands of all time, which is the Stranglers, with Hugh Cornwell. I mean, they were much older. They were teaching students. They were. You had an ice cream seller who was on the keyboards. The drummer. Jet Black owned a off license. They had, they were accepted though. They were accepted. They had the vibrators. As I said, if you're really trying to find the like there's not all of it's good, guys. Like all metal is good. I mean, I don't really connect to the Susie and the Banshee sound. I've got their albums. I have the first album, Scream. I don't play it. I'm not a fan. I don't really like it. It's not because it's a female singing, because you know me, that's not the case. I absolutely adore X-Ray Specs and Polystyrene. Sadly, Polystyrene passed away quite some time ago now, maybe 5 to 8 years ago. I've got to check. And she, if you really want a song off of an album, and the album is Germ-Free Adolescence, if you want a song that typifies the punk movement at that one moment in time, is, I would say to you, is The World Turned Dayglow. It's got saxophone solos. It's got almost inaudible lyrics from a beautiful, beautiful West Indian, London-born West Indian woman in Polystyrene, and it's just full of energy. All right, The Cure comes out from that sort of early scene. The Vibrators, as I said, then you sort of, I could name so many, Pete and Test Tube Babies. I've got hundreds of punk singles, because punk wasn't at that time an album-driven medium. Because they were making them quick and easy, the cheapest way to make them a song and to get it out there was to print it on a single. It was easy, quick. Most of the bands would stick there making the album covers together. The Stiff Little Fingers, there's a great interview, if you listen to Inflammable Material on Spotify, at the end, there's an interview with him, with Jake Burns, and he says that, they would spend time in the back room of their house, or the record label at Rough Trade, and they would be sticking the record covers together as the band. So it was single driven, because then you could do all the fancy coloured vinyls and the funny artwork and press them quickly. I've got a pressing of a vinyl of a single that I'd only made 10 of, picked up for £1. It is awful. It is absolutely awful. It's like 6 songs on one single, for like 50 seconds each, these things. Anyway, I digress. So not everything's great. Pardon me, get some drink. But there is so much diversity. You have reggae and dub. The Clash are getting heavily into their American Midwest and dub and reggae sounding. John Lydon, when he left the Pistols and went to the Peel, he invented electronic music. I'm going to put it out there. He did. With Peel, and and it was all bass guitar driven, wasn't it, guys? You had JJ Burnell of the Stranglers, you had Jar Wobble of Peel, you had Foxton of the Jam, and again, Jam, another classic example. They're taking that 60s route, they're playing Rickenbacker guitars, they're jingly jangly rock and roll, Kinks driven, heavily Kinks influenced, but with that fast and hard. One of the very first songs I ever learnt to play on the bass was Going Underground. It's just a delicious guitar, a bass part to play, actually. So where I'm coming from is that the diversity of UK punk is so greatly more than the American counterpart, because of the streets, and the political issues and like we mentioned earlier, it did create that burning fire. The sad thing is, and as I was saying, I think that punk died in 1980. It clearly did. I don't think it truly exists anymore as a medium. Yes, you have bands who play punk music, and you have American bands like Green Day who sort of think they're punk. Sorry, Green Day listeners. And you have the American punky sound, and you still have the UK sounds as well. There was still UK punk bands. The second wave after 80, there was a punk that I do sort of grey area, because I love the Exploited and the UK Subs and Crass, and all that anarcho-punk stuff that came out from that sort of 81 to 83 period. And again, I could do a whole show on that side of the punk movement. I'm not going to. Like bands like, we'll do maybe in the future, bands like Zounds and things like that. Anyway, the reason I say it died in 1980, fellow listeners, is that Sid Vicious died in 1980. And to me, if anyone, I've got a big tattoo of him on my back, okay? I have a big poster on my wall of him. I have books, his biography, biographies and so on. The reason that people say, but Tony, he couldn't play his guitar. He was drugged all the time. That is not the case. He was drugged. He did take drugs. He fell in with Nancy Spungen. I'm not going to go over that story. His mother was a drug user. He was from that kind of sad background, but he loved T-Rex. He loved David Bowie. He wanted to be... To me, he was the spark, the true spark, sorry, I'm gesticulating with my hands. The true, wipe it up afterwards, I'm sure. The true spark of rock and roll. He really was. He burnt too fast. He died too young. He was never going to live past 21. Right? And that's the truth. because when you have a flame of rock and roll in you that fiery and that hot, it was going to consume you, and it consumed him. And in 1980, when he died of that overdose, when he came back out of Rikers, and his mother gave him that fatal dose that was too strong for him because he'd been clean in prison, it really did die. And I think we should look upon punk now as in a historical aspect. I don't think we can look at it as a relevant aspect, but more of a historical aspect, because yes, the world is in flux all the time, and I did say flux, F-U-L-X, guys. It is in flux all the time, politically, emotionally, and now with all this social media crap. But it's not the same as it was back in from 74 to 76, 77. It just wasn't. It isn't. And on that note, so I'm coming to the end of the show and I'm starting to ramble. Please do go out and explore whichever form of punk you like, whether it be American, whether it be the UK, whether it be Germany, wherever part of the world you're in. I'm sure that somewhere in this, wherever you were in 77, there was, or at 78, there was a punk band playing. A band that was influenced by The Clash, The Damned, The Pistols, The Ramones. Okay, again, I didn't really check on the Ramones, but the Ramones are, I think they are truly, outside of the Pistols, the two greatest punk bands ever to really walk a stage. People out there who are going to sneer and say all about The Clash, all about The Damned. The Clash and The Damned, yes, very, very important. But the Ramones, along with the Pistols, are the real sound, the real energy of the movement. The Damned were the speed. The Clash were the band that could straddle America and take it to America. So they were important there. But the Pistols were nihilistic, and they had an image that was undeniably addictive. And a sound that, I mean, Steve Jones is still one of my favourite guitarists in all the world. And Paul Cook on drums, 18 years old. How's he playing drums like that at 18? And Steve Jones, I know he was copying Johnny Thunders. He even had all the moves, same as Johnny Thunders. All the slides, all the guitar, all the bits, they all do sound a bit like Johnny Thunders. But you know what? He took it and he twisted it himself. Wore the hanky on the head, string vest, leather pants, sneer, spit, and violence. Just, it's delicious. Anyway, I do urge you to go and listen to something. Don't just because it's not metal sneer at it. I know that you see interviews of early metal new album people like Steve Harris saying, because they asked us to cut our hair short because it was to get on top of the pops. Yeah. Take that with a pinch of salt, really, because I'm sure deep down they probably enjoy a bit of punk. Most people do, even if it's the Offspring or something American like that, that you can enjoy. And then, of course, off from there is ska, but that's another episode, of course. Do, as I said, have a listen, give it a go. Don't use your prejudice not to listen to it, because I think you're going to find somewhere. I mean, I didn't mention XTC. I mean, XTC. The greatest British pop band outside of the Beatles, and they are a punk band. Make some of my favourite all-time albums: English Settlement, Drums and Wires, which again, side note, sorry to go back and ramble back, but Drums and Wires was the first time an album was recorded with the drums recorded in the mix ahead of the guitars. So it was more drum driven, and lyrically, you're not gonna find a better band, put a pop band in this world, I reckon, outside the Beatles, the next TC. And now I've said it. Anyway, I've rambled enough. I've gone on to 39 minutes. I really do love the medium of punk. I really, really do. And I hope I've enthused you in the subject. I'd like you to go on and have a listen. Look, I know that you don't reach out. I've not anyone so far in 43 episodes hasn't really reached out to me. I'd love someone to reach out and say something. I am in the middle of processing and making a website and a Facebook page where you can reach me easily. But you can still go to my email me at heavymetaltones@gmail.com. That's all one word, heavymetaltones@gmail.com. I will put the link in the description below, and just let me know if you enjoy the show. And please do try and go on, if you're on Spotify or on YouTube, just give me a rating, even if it's 1 star. It helps me reach more people, and I want to reach more people because I've got so much to say, so much to give, and I'm really enjoying it. So anyway, that's my begging over and done with. So now I've begged, now I'm about to go and just sort of play some really loud rock and roll. Maybe I'm going to stick on Never Mind the Bollocks, I reckon. I think we'll get a good bit of spin now. Anyway, see you guys. Bye.